Hey guys, today I have my favorite features from Apple Motion. You know I love Apple Motion, and I know you do too if you're subscribed to my channel. So I'm going to go through with you what I think are the best features in Apple Motion. We're going to be looking at text effects, behaviors, filters, generators, all the different features in Apple Motion that I reach for all the time because I know there's a lot of stuff in there and it can get overwhelming. Let's just dive right into it. All right, guys, let's talk about my favorite features when it comes to text appearance. We're first going to start with the custom color on metallic text. So we want to switch our text to 3D. And down here under materials, we're going to switch it to metal. And then hit the drop down where it says aluminum and go all the way down to custom. And now we can change the color of the metal. I personally like to change the color of this metal to sort of a pinky shade, dial down the shininess, and there you've got some beautiful rose gold text. I love this look. My next favorite motion feature is also in text appearance, and it is transform glyph. So let's go on over here to our cursor menu and select transform glyph. And now we can change these characters individually. So we could make this O more of a traditional yellow gold while not impacting the other letters. You can even change the fonts with transform glyph, and you can really get a very custom look with your text this way. And my next favorite motion feature is also in text appearance. Let's go over to the inspector window, hit layout, and let's use this drop down to go from type to path. And then let's head down to path options and change this, let's say, to a circle. And now look what we've done. We have made this text go in kind of a circular shape, and we can change the radius of that circle. And we can even change the path offset. And we can even have the text go inside the circle. I love using the path options on text to make the text look a little bit different than a boring straight line. All right, now let's talk about some text behaviors that I reach for a lot. The first one is type on. If you head on up to behaviors at the top center of your screen, go to text animation, type on. And now the text will type on character by character. If you want it to happen faster, just reduce the size of this purple bar. That's a great classic look. Another great text behavior is under behaviors, text basic. This is drift in. Let me show you the default on this one. The letters drift in from left to right as they fade in. You can make this action happen faster, of course, by reducing the size of the purple bar. And then if you want to change the direction of the drift, let's turn on our overlays. And what we can do is use these arrows to change the direction of our drift so we can have it come straight up instead. And what I like to do is if we head on over to the inspector window, let's drop down on format. Let's turn up the opacity so we lose that fade in. And then you get just kind of that pop on and lift up that's really popular right now. Another behavior I really like is if you go under behaviors, energetic, let's go to flip in. Let me show you the default on this. The letters fade in and flip up in a random order. Let's select flip in our timeline, head on over to behaviors. Let's go down to control now, and let's change the direction from random to forwards. And that's the look that I personally like. I use that a lot on CTA end pages with people's websites. Another great text behavior is if you go up to behaviors, go down to text basic and arrange in. Here's what the default is. Not in love with that. Let's head on over to the inspector window. Let's go to control. And instead of animating the character, let's go down to word and let's speed up that action. And that's a great effect as well. Another one that's really great if you're doing something kind of techie is also under text basic. This one is substitute in, and the letters slide in and also randomize until they spell out what your text actually says. Another one that's really good if you want to highlight your text is the glow through. We'll go up to behaviors, text highlighter, glow through, and I like to move the glow through later in my timeline. We can change the color of that glow by heading over to the text tab, appearance, and under glow, we can make it a different color. Back under behaviors here, if we go to controls, you can change the direction so we can actually glow backward or from the center to edges if you wanted to. And under the glow drop down, you can reduce the amount of blur, play with the radius and the scale. You can do a lot with that one. Another behavior that's great for highlighting is if you go to behaviors, text highlighter, let's hit scale through. And this is another one where I like to move the action a little bit further down the line. And we can make it happen slower by extending that purple bar. I like that one a lot. All right, for our next group, let's head on over to the library. Let's hit generators. Let me show you some of my favorite generators. The first one might surprise you. It is cellular. Doesn't look like much, but cellular can actually be used to disintegrate text and other objects in Apple Motion. If you guys want a dedicated tutorial about that one, let me know down in the comments. All right, back over to generators. Here's something that's a little bit boring, but no surprise. This is the color solid. This to me is pretty much what I start almost any project with unless I'm working with a transparent background. It defaults to blue, but of course you can make it any color. Typically I start with white. Not too exciting, but definitely a feature you can't live without. But if you want something a little more exciting than a color solid, let's head on over to gradient. This is the default gradient. Let's select it in our project pane, head on over to inspector, and let's hit this drop down here so we can have a little more fun with these colors. Once you get your colors settled, if you want to soften this sort of harsh line here in the center, let's head on down to our start and end points. And this is where you can rotate and expand the gradient. Make it a little more gradual. Love that gradient, guys. Again, back over in our generators, here's another one that honestly I cannot live without. This one is called numbers. And what numbers does, it's basically running numbers. Now with this generator, if you head over to generator here in our inspector window, you can start the count anywhere you want. We could start at 10 and then we could go up to 1,000,000. We can have the count happen faster by shrinking the element down in our timeline. And we can really customize this. You can add decimals. You could set a minimum of digits, so it would look like this to start. You could change the format to just from a number to a currency, to a percent. You could even have the numbers spelled out. I mean, the numbers generator to me is so useful in so many circumstances. I reach for it all the time. Back in generators, let's head down to the 2-color ray. This to me is just such a fun look. It's a great background. This black and white default's really contrasty, but you can change each of the colors to something a little more fun and bright. You can change the waviness of the 2-color ray. And you can even change the offset of the center so it looks more like this. The 2-color ray is really fun if you can find a place for it. All right, let's go back to the library. This time, let's head down to particle emitters. The one particle emitter you know I reach for all the time is this one here, Snow Flurry. I've definitely used this in a couple projects on my channel, and I just adore it. It just feels very surreal to me. And of course, if we head on over to Inspector, we can modify so much about these snow flurries. We can change how many there are, the shape that they come at us from. We can change the color of these blurs. I just think there's something so magical about the way these snow flurries move. All right, now let's talk about some of the more broad features of Apple Motion. Of course, we'd have to talk about the camera. You may recognize this project if you missed this. I definitely think you should check it out. I'll throw a card up on the screen so you can see how I made this still image look 3D, in part by using the camera feature in Apple Motion. The camera is really what gives a lot of projects in Apple Motion their depth and life. Love that camera. Now let's talk about another awesome feature in Apple Motion. That is the replicator. So I've got my logo here. If I'm selected on it on my project pane, let's head on over to the top right of the screen and hit replicate. And now I've got so many more versions of my logo. And over here in the inspector window, I can make so many changes. I can change the shape. I can reduce the number of columns and rows so it looks a little less crowded. I can up the scale, give them a little separation. I can change the offset of these guys, the angle, and I can even colorize over pattern. How fun is that? You saw me use this technique with one of my dynamic text tutorials, and the replicator is pretty awesome if you have a good idea for it. Now let's talk about one of the greatest features in Apple Motion that is tucked away. If you didn't know where to look for it, you would be lost. And that is the image mask. So if I wanted to take this gradient and cut these letters out of it, this is how I would do that. Let's select gradient in our project pane, head on over to object, very, very top left of our screen, and let's select add image mask. And now we've got this kind of drop zone here where it's asking us what do we want to clip out of our gradient. We're going to head on over to our project pane, grab this text and drag it. And now we've got a gradient of our text, but if we want to cut the text out of the gradient, let's hit invert and look. Now, if I wanted to change what my mask said or the scale of it, all I have to do is select that text in my project pane, even though the box is unchecked and it's hidden. And we can raise the size of this mask, change the font, and it applies to the image mask in the gradient. Love that image mask. One other feature that's super important in Apple Motion is the task list. Let's say you're going to share your Motion project. Just hit F9 or go over to Window and Show Task List, and you get a progress bar so you can see how that export is going. All right, now let's talk about some of my favorite behaviors. I've got my logo back here on the screen. I'm going to select it. Head on up to behaviors. This first one is under basic motion. It is the motion path, and you can see what this does. Let me zoom out on my canvas so we can see our entire path here. This first dot is the start point of my motion, and this one over here on the right is the end point. I can grab these points and move them however I see fit. The other thing I can do is if I hover my cursor over this red line, hold down the Option key, I get the pen tool, and I can add a new point here and change my motion path and have it have multiple points. I can make the motion happen faster by shrinking down the behavior in my timeline. The motion path is a great basic tool. Another behavior that's obviously really basic but comes in super handy is again under basic motion, fade in and fade out. This has your object fade in and fade out at the end. By default, if we head on over to the inspector window, we can see that the default is 20 frames. And you can speed those up or slow them down as you see fit. Another behavior you know I love, because I talk about this one all the time, is under parameter. And let's hit overshoot. I'm going to shrink down the overshoot behavior in my timeline before we do anything with it. And let's head on over to the inspector window under the apply to line. Let's do the rotation on the Z axis. Let's bring down that start value and bring down that ramp duration, give us a little more bounce. And the overshoot can be applied to pretty much any part of an object, so you can change the scale. I do that a lot. You can even do it to different filters that are applied. You can do it to opacity. I mean, the overshoot behavior is just fun and gives your projects a lot of life. Another behavior that comes in handy a lot is, again, under parameter, and this one is randomize. And again, the randomize can be applied to really any of the properties on your object. Here's an example of how I used the randomize behavior on a project on my main channel. If you haven't subscribed to my main channel, you can find it just under Jenn Jager. Another behavior that comes in handy can be found under behaviors, shape, and write on. And it'll take any shape that you've created in Apple Motion and it'll draw it on for you. And we can speed it up by shrinking down the behavior in the timeline. All right, now let's dive into those filters. Here is a B-roll shot we're working with. Let's head on up to filters, top center of our screen. And this one here, I can't live without, is this Gaussian blur. The default on the Gaussian blur is very low. It's just at 4. It's really imperceptible in my mind, but we can dial it up to 64. You think is the limit, but actually if you grab these numbers, click down on your mouse and then push your mouse forward, you can really blur out that video. Love that Gaussian blur. Another filter that's really great is under distortion, and this one you need to know, this is flop. It reverses the image, comes in handy a lot. Just make sure you don't have any text on your screen so no one knows that you flipped your shot. Another filter I can't live without is, again, under distortion. This is the disc warp. And what the disc warp does is distort your elements. You can play with the radius, the positioning, the center. You've seen me use this a bunch of times. In fact, this is how I created this subscribe animation. You guys, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button now. Give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying this video and let me know what your favorite feature is in Apple Motion down in those comments. Another filter I have to talk about will help me take a multicolor logo like this one and turn it into one solid color, which can be really helpful when you're compositing a logo over video. So let me show you how to do this. I'm going to turn on a white color background here so you can see how this works. I'm going to select my logo in the project pane. Let's head on up to filters, color, and colorize. Now, if we head on over to our inspector window, we can see that by default, the colorize filter has remapped our blacks to this kind of brown tone and our whites to this cream color. I'm going to switch both of these to black. And now you can see that our logo is all one color, whereas it used to be red and white. You can make a logo any color of the rainbow using the colorize feature. It's very handy. And another distortion filter I really love is, again, under distortion, head on down to twirl. You guys saw me use this technique in my logo animation tutorial. I will put a card up for that tutorial as well. The twirl is so fun. All right, now let's head on to some of the more basic features in Apple Motion that you really need to know. The first one is the shape tool. Center of your screen, hit this drop down and you can draw a rectangle. The default is for it to be this yellow thick outline. You can fill it in by hitting the fill button in your inspector window. Let's turn off that outline and we can fill it even with a gradient. You can resize and change the dimension of your rectangle by just selecting it with the selection tool and using these handles to modify it. I use this a lot if I have like a banner at the bottom of the screen. The other modification I like to use with, let's say, the rectangle tool is to head on over to geometry, and we can change the roundness of the rectangle so it's a little softer looking. And then we can even skew it by converting it to points and just grabbing the corners and repositioning them how we see fit. The next tool that I cannot live without is the Bezier. It's right next to the shape tool in Apple Motion here in the center of the screen. Just select this tool and then just start drawing in your canvas. I'm gonna make this spiral shape and then just click anywhere in your project pane to set it. There's your Bezier line. We can, of course, dial down the width on this. Let's head on over to geometry in our inspector window, dial up that roundness so it looks like a coil, and then we can fine tune by selecting these dots. But if we want to add more structure, again, just hit Option, click along that line, and you can modify it even more. All right, the last tool I have to mention is Anchor Point. If you head on over to your cursor menu, drop down, select Anchor Point, what you get in your canvas is this icon with these red and green arrows and this little blue dot in the center. Let me show you, if we leave our anchor point center on our logo, which is the default, what happens. Let's head on over to the inspector window and let's rotate this logo on the y-axis, and I'll show you what happens here. You can see that the logo is rotating from the center. Let's reset that. And now let's move our anchor point using these arrows, let's say all the way to the left end of the logo. And now if we head back over to our inspector, watch what happens if I rotate on the Y. You can see it hinges from that left side. The anchor point is super helpful in really getting custom movements, behaviors, and adjustments in Apple Motion. All right, now let's talk about the canvas. There's a lot of tools in the canvas to really help you perfect the alignment of your elements in Apple Motion. Let's head on up to the top right of the screen. Drop down on View, and the first one I want to show you is Grid. Grid is great for helping you figure out the spacing between your elements to make sure that they're equally spaced. So what I would do with these bullet points, for example, is I would select the first bullet point and know that I want this first line of text to rest under the third square here in my grid. And this bullet point, I would space it down so it's resting on top of the lower three squares, and then adjust the center bullet point so I have about 2 squares between them. Another great feature in the canvas I have to talk about is dynamic guides. And what this will do will help you with your alignment. Let's say we wanted to right justify all of these bullet points. Watch what happens. As I grab the second one, I get these yellow lines that tell me, okay, yeah, these two are lined up perfectly. And again, here as well. It's also really handy for making sure your elements are centered. That bullet point there is perfectly centered. Let's try here. There we go. The next great feature in the canvas works if you are working in a 3D project. So let's add object up the top center of the screen and add a camera. And yeah, let's switch it to 3D. And now we can use another feature in the canvas that really helps us in this situation. And that is the 3D view. Once you've applied a camera and you're in 3D, you're gonna get this little icon in the bottom left of your canvas. And this helps you see your project from all different viewpoints. So let's look at it from the right. I can see here's my camera, and I can see that my text elements are all in line here. What if I selected my first bullet point in the project pane, headed on over to properties, drop down on position, and let's look at that Z position. If I move it forward, now I can see where it is in relation to the rest of my bullet points. Let's take the second one and move it here. Now to go back to our regular perspective, just select that middle icon and then head on up to this drop down where it says perspective, select active camera, and that's what our project looks like now. The last feature in the canvas that you need to know about is safe zones. Go up to view and then head on down and select safe zones, and you get these blue lines in your canvas. What these blue lines are a guideline for what is considered safe placement of elements in Apple Motion, because if you upload a video to the internet, you will see the entire canvas in playback, but if you were playing this on a television set, a lot of the frame might get cropped off at the edges. What this inner line does is it tells you where it's safe to put text, and this outer line shows you where it's safe to put graphics. My last favorite features in Apple Motion are down here in the timeline. So we've got this B-roll shot, but what if I wanted to crop in tighter on the second half of this shot? How do I split this clip into two? I'm going to select it here in my timeline, going to head on up to edit, the very, very top left of my screen, and hit split. And now I've got a cut between these two shots. Now both of these B-roll shots are selected, so you want to make sure you're clicking anywhere else in the timeline to deselect, and then just select the very one you want to modify. And let's say we head on over to properties and let's juice up the scale here. Now if I wanted to do a good job of queuing up my cursor between these two shots, let's turn on snapping. If you're an editor in Final Cut, I'm sure you know all about snapping. Well, Motion has it too. Just makes it easy for you to find your point in your timeline between your elements. And the last feature that you know I have to talk about, because I talk about it all the time in all of my tutorials, is the keyframe editor. If you head on over to the top right of your timeline, you see these three little diamonds. That opens up your keyframe editor. And then what you can do here is select an element and see the placement of the keyframes and make adjustments to those keyframes right here in the keyframe editor. You can right click a keyframe and change the interpolation. Let's make this BZA. And then I can grab these handles and change the curvature of my motion so that it accelerates or decelerates throughout the action. The keyframe editor in Apple Motion is so superior to the tools offered in Final Cut, and it gives you so much control. I love this keyframe editor. You cannot live without it. All right, guys, that's it. Those are my favorite features in Apple Motion. Which ones are also your favorite? Which are your favorite that I missed? Let us know in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you for creating with me today, and I will see you again.